Welcome to From Rome.Info video. My name is Brother Alexis Bugnolo, and this is the documentary on Pope Benedict's Renunciation, the facts, the laws, and the consequences. So we've discussed the facts and the laws, and in this, the sixth episode, we'll discuss conspiracy, because as we've seen from the facts and the laws, it's pretty obvious that all the cardinals and all the bishops should regard Benedict as the Pope. Any sane, rational, objective, academic, scientific, impartial study, analysis, investigation, with all the facts that are known. It's not that I have secret facts that I have basing my judgment on public documents, concludes to that conclusion. So if they don't, there must be a reason, okay? So now we will discuss possibilities of conspiracy. Now I'm not going to talk about conspiracy theories where people have a feeling, a fear, an emotion, a suspicion that's not founded on facts or realities that draw us from other things. And at FromRome.Info, in the article linked at the top of the website entitled An Index to Pope Benedict's Renunciation, you'll see 50 or so articles that I and others have written, mostly myself. And I have a good number of conspiracy articles. If you look at my very first article, I list facts versus conjecture. I have a lot of articles conjecture. And in the last 18 months, I have advanced many different conjectures to try to square the evidence. So I'm not going to discuss all those now, but I want to talk about what is a conspiracy and how do you determine it, and then we'll look at the facts. So conspiracy in English is the Latin word conspiratio, and it means a breathing together, a sharing of an intent or desire. So every conspiracy has a purpose, okay? Because there's no reason for men to come together and collaborate unless it's for a purpose. It's not just purposeless, because we're creatures of purpose. And every conspiracy has a method, because the conspiracy must achieve its purpose through some means that they don't want others to know about. Because if they wanted others to know about, it wouldn't be a conspiracy, it'd be an open organization or something, right? You know, the local confraternity of the Holy Rosary doesn't have a conspiracy about saying the Rosary. After the noon Mass, they let everyone know, they say them, and they do it out in the open. Okay, that's not you wouldn't call that a conspiracy. Okay, so conspiracy implies in the way it's used, although not in the original Latin, that something is a cult, that something is hidden. A cult means hidden, it doesn't mean satanic necessarily. Okay. So if it's hidden, the problem of determining whether there is a conspiracy in a rational, forensic, scientific, police kind of way is we have to try to uncover the signs of its existence through what we know. Because if it's hidden, we don't know that. Especially if it's a group, a secret group that's doing it, we don't know who the members are or where they are. But we know it by touching the outsides of it. We feel the external effects of it, and then we can follow those effects through the persons from which they're coming back to the group, and then sketch out what the conspiracy is. So this is how you investigate a conspiracy of any kind. And I draw on my knowledge of anthropology to speak about this topic. Okay, I don't know this because I'm a Franciscan friar or because I went to pontifical universities. Okay, because I studied cultural anthropology at the University of Florida. Okay, so signs of its existence, purpose, and ends. Generally speaking, we don't know a conspiracy exists until we start running into things that are anomalies. Okay, so like with Sherlock Holmes, as soon as you find something that's anomalous, that's not explicable, it points to a series of causes and effects of which you are unaware and didn't expect existed, but is the reason why that thing took place. And I'll talk from my personal experience of how I've come here to Rome, and I've investigated this problem for 18 months. Not always at Rome. I've been at Rome about 6 months now. 6 months, 7 months. So I wrote many cardinals. I've written 700 members of the clergy of Rome, and I've distributed information to more than 500 students of theology and canon law here at Rome. So everyone who's everyone has heard my name and knows what I stand for and what I'm investigating. Of all the cardinals I've written, only one wrote me back, okay? And that was Cardinal E-I-J-K. I don't know how you pronounce that name, Ike. in the Netherlands. And I did so because Bishop Gracida, who has written many cardinals and bishops about his doubts about the validity of the renunciation and the validity of the election, which he had from the beginning 7 years ago, and no one's listened to him, mentioned that he had contacted all the cardinals and only one wrote him back, Cardinal Ike. So I figured if I wrote Cardinal Ike, he would write me back, and in fact he did. And I said I asked him if I could have a meeting with him, and he asked me what the meeting would be about, and I said it would be about the canonical problems with the renunciation of Pope Benedict. So then I got a response from his secretary, not from him, saying he would not meet with me over that topic. Okay, so I can understand that if I thought the world was flat, he wouldn't want to discuss my theories of why the world is flat, because it's an absurd, unscientific, and it's not true, so I can understand there are certain topics a cardinal doesn't want to talk to anyone about. And Cardinal Ike was made a cardinal by Pope Benedict the year before all this thing happened. So he was made a cardinal in 2012. So he should be loyal to Benedict, and he should care about it. He's also one of the few cardinals who, when Benedict was announced to have renounced, he said it must be a joke, because on that day of the year was the Tuesday before Ash Wednesday, and that's a day in which you make jokes in the German-speaking world or in the Netherlands, and he thought it was a joke. And so I figured he'd be open to it, and his cardinal said no. So I can understand he doesn't want to speak to me because he might think it's an absurd idea, but the fact that he thinks it's an absurd idea when it's not, when it's based on facts, because then I sent him all the canonical evidence in email to his private email, and no response, not even a thank you. Okay, so perhaps it's me, because my parents are educators, I believe in truth, I'm curious, I'm investigative. If someone sends me a legal brief saying the election, the nomination of a certain bishop in such and such a country involves simony, I'm not even from that country. I'm not even concerned about that. But if they send me the information, I'm going to read it because, hey, that's interesting. Let me read about it. Let me see what the argument is. Is it well-founded and stuff like that? But maybe cardinals aren't that way. But we do know one thing. The cardinal is afraid to meet with me to discuss this topic. Not to meet with me. He was willing to meet with me. I think he got the impression if I wanted to discuss the problems in the church, theological problems in the church. But on this topic, he will not speak with me. So he fears something, and if he fears something, the obvious conclusion is the other cardinals might think bad of him, or evidently among the cardinals, because his secretary said to me, he is aware of these arguments, but he doesn't want to speak with you. So if he's aware of these arguments, but still regards Bugnolo as the Pope, because if Benedict's the Pope, Bugnolo could never have been elected validly, and therefore it's not the Pope. If he's aware of these arguments, he obviously doesn't accept the evidence, because I said all the evidence shows that Benedict's the Pope, and I gave him good canonical arguments if he wanted to investigate him. He never followed up, never contacted me. So that means he's aware that among the cardinals, there is a decision not to discuss this, and not to pay any attention to canon law, the facts, or the evidence. But their agreement is this, that Benedict's not the Pope, that Benedict validly resigned. So here's our first evidence, just from my brief interaction with Cardinal Ike, that there is a conspiracy, and this is what it is. And we'll see that this is confirmed. For example, Cardinal Brandmuller has a doctorate in canon law. He is purported in the press to have been opposed to Benedict's renunciation, and said Benedict did it without the advice of any council, without the approving advice of his counselors, and he rejected even that. And he wrote a whole academic paper, I mentioned this before in a previous episode, that was published, I think, in the Journal of the Catholic University of Milan, on whether a pope can renounce. And in his entire study, which is like 30 pages in Italian, he never once discussed the first phrase of Canon 332, if it happened that the Roman Pontiff renounces munus. So why would you write 30 pages on whether a pope can renounce because you're upset that Pope Benedict renounced, and not discuss the one part of the canon which can prove that he didn't renounce, just like you want him not to renounce? So Cardinal Brandmuller knows, because I asked Cardinal Brand if I could have a meeting with him to discuss that paper he wrote, and he said he was sick, and he's been sick now for 3 months, and he will still want to meet with me. So I know he's afraid to talk about this too, because his whole academic paper was what I call disinformation. He wants you to look at something else. He doesn't want you to look at that phrase. He says he's against the renunciation, but he's not really against it, because if he was, he'd look at that phrase. And he's intelligent enough to know if you can prove that phrase, you've won the argument. So there's another sign of conspiracy. They don't want you to look at that phrase, okay? Because an academic paper in 30 pages should discuss every word in that canon, and okay? So here we have another point of evidence, another cardinal, and so the conspiracy regards obviously that phrase now. Benedict, in their mind, Benedict has renounced because that phrase is unquestionable. You cannot question that he renounced the munus by saying, I renounce the ministerium. That's their doctrine. You cannot, it's unquestionable, okay? And we've already seen why they must hold the theory that it can't be questioned, because as soon as you start questioning it, you end up 18 months later producing a documentary like I did, just showing all the facts that it is totally questionable. It's totally questionable. And if you can't win the argument, the only way to sustain your position is by silence. Okay? Because as soon as you open your mouth, you show that you have no reasons for your position. Okay? So the fact that none of the cardinals will debate it is another sign that they founded their decision not on the facts, but on something else. Okay? So something else is their motive for saying Benedict resigned. It's not the law. It's not what Benedict said. It's not the series of events. They won't even discuss it. And we see this also in the interview that Diane Montana at LifeSite did with Cardinal Brandmuller, Roberto Di Mattei, Archbishop Ganswein, and Cardinal Burke. Now, Burke said I think it would be difficult to prove that Benedict did not intend to resign. I already explained why that statement is completely unfounded on the evidence, and so it's misinformation. Roberto Di Mattei quoted some canons that have, he didn't even quote the right canons. He got it all wrong, and he's not a canonist, so why she interviewed him, I don't know. Brandmuller, I used to have a high regard for Brandmuller, but after I read this interview, I realized that Brandmuller is dishonest. I will say it publicly, he's a dishonest man. Because he says in his interview with Montana, those who claim that Benedict's not the Pope because he didn't intend to resign are violating his principal law, praetor de internis non judicat. A judge of internal manners does not judge, in the sense of we don't judge whether he renounced or not based on what he intended, but what is in the act, okay? But that's what they're doing. They're saying Benedict intended to resign, therefore the fact that he said ministerium means he intended to say munus, and therefore the resignation is valid. Whereas those who say Benedict's still the Pope are saying we don't know what he intended, but what he said doesn't fulfill the law. So Brandmuller, by giving that response, show he's totally dishonest, because what he said should have had the conclusion, and therefore I regard Benedict as the Pope. But what he said, his conclusion was, therefore Benedict's not the Pope. Okay? That's completely honest, and some of the doctorate in canon law knows he's lying when he says that. And Diane Montana was either forced to do that whole interview with all these lies and faults in it, or she is so unprepared in the topic that she didn't realize she was being lied to. She subsequently, I think just 2 weeks ago, last week, resigned from LifeSite News, and that was about a year after she did this interview. Maybe she's gotten so much kickback from it, she realized that she basically ruined her career. She even mentioned he's going into another field through that one interview. So when you can get 3 people in Rome who have, Cardinal Burke, Cardinal Brandmuller, and Dr. Roberto Mattei, 3 people of rather high relief in Rome, obviously the cardinal's higher than Dr. Roberto Mattei, all just lie together, you have a sign of a conspiracy, because an intellectual person isn't apt to agree with another person except if it's on the basis of truth or on the basis of a conspiracy. Because usually when people lie, they don't lie in unison. Okay, lying in unison is a sign of conspiracy. But true men speaking the truth in unison is not a sign of conspiracy. It's just a testimony to the truth, which is objective and anything that can be seen. So that's more of the evidence. Now, Edward Penton, who is a leading journalist for the National Register, he also reports with other organizations. He engaged in a Twitter dialogue with Veri Cattolici's Twitter account, and, which at the time he thought that I was the one running the account, attacking me, saying, I am dividing the church by raising these questions. I am dividing the church, not Bugnolo. I am dividing the church. And that the solution is that you, Bugnolo, need to talk to Cardinal Burke, and he will clarify all these things for you and make you see that what you've done is wrong and you should change your ways. Very communist kind of argument, and he was absolutely enraged that Veri Cattolici published his conversation to just expose him for what he is. Penton is completely dishonest person to say things like that, and on his own initiative he began his argument. He wasn't invited to a dialogue and then he began it. No, he began this thing. So I get the impression he was asked by Burke or someone to attempt to shut me up. Okay, but I'm a Franciscan, I'm humble, and I know I can defeat almost anyone in an argument, so I'm not afraid of these people. So when I was in Rome, I went twice to the offices of Burke and asked for a meeting, because I really wanted the Cardinal to convince me I'm wrong. Well, I was told he's not in the office, come back next month. And then I came back next month. Well, he's going to be in office in January, I'll see you get a meeting, I was told. January came, January passed. I learned that in January, I don't think he was even in Rome. He never contacted me back. I suppose he's done some research now and realized that he won't be able to convince me, and that anything he says to me will probably get announced to the world. And that's true, because I believe everyone in the church has the right to know what's going on. So that's the second sign of conspiracy. Burke has a doctrine of canon law. Is considered one of the great experts of canon law in the entire church. If he won't speak to me when he has time to speak with me, maybe it must be because he has no counter-argument. Because if he had a counter-argument, a man of God, he'd say, poor brother Alexis, he's just so deceived because he doesn't have know these things, and therefore I'm going to enlighten him and save his soul and turn him into an apostle of Bergoglio's the Pope. You know, if it was founded on truth, a man of God would have that zeal. So Burke, I'm not denying Burke is a man of God. So he must have that zeal if his cause was true. But he doesn't act that way, and therefore I must conclude his cause is not true and that he's part of the conspiracy. And why is that case? Well, Niccolo Books told me that when before 2013, when Burke was an apostolic signature and had questions about canon law, he would ask Pope Benedict for a private audience to discuss decisions of the law and what to do about it. And Benedict would make him wait months on end, 3-4 months, and made Burke wait. And that's humiliating for a cardinal if you have to wait 3-4 months to ask the Pope a few questions. But why would Benedict do that? Okay, we'll get to that in a moment. Another point of conspiracy is when I went to the Pontifical Council of Legislative Texts on December 11th, and I met with Monsignor Arieta, who wrote the commentary on canon law that I use, like a Bible, because what he says here is what I sustain in this documentary. I expected to get a lot of agreement from him. In fact, we agreed on all the points and principles of law. Except he says Bergoglio is the Pope. So here I'm going to talk about signs of a conspiracy. This is a classic case. So I'll use a hypothetical here, because I'm going to talk directly about Monsignor Arieta. He was very kind to give me a meeting, and I thank him for that. He's one of the only people in the Roman Curia that had that much respect as a man of God, okay, to meet with me. So let's say you go to a university, a faculty of mathematics, and you get a meeting with a doctor, someone who has a doctorate in mathematics. And you sit down at the table with him and say, Professor, I have some questions about mathematics. Now, I want to be absolutely sure. 1 + 1 = 2, is that correct? And he says, yes, that's correct. And then you say, and 2 plus 2 equals 4? And he says, yes, that's correct. And so, Professor, I have one third question. Does that mean that 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 4? And he says, no, it equals 5. Okay, see what happened? So he agrees with you on all the principles, but on the final conclusion, he says something that's totally irrational that undoes everything he said about what he agreed on principles. If you met a professor of mathematics like that, you would probably think there's only two possibilities. He's insane, or he wants to deceive you because he can't say 2 plus 2 equals 4. Because he fears some group in the faculty or in the university will do him in some way, destroy his career if he actually says that, because he knows you might quote him what he says, so he's going to say 5. It's also an effrontery to your dignity, because to lie so boldly in the face of someone is just absolutely outrageously disrespectful. Okay? So, Monsignor Arieta and I agree on all the points of canon law, except that he says, it is absolutely clear the renunciation is valid. And I said to him, well, if you say that when Pope Benedict says ministerium, it means munus, isn't that an interpretation? No question, no response to that question. And he spent 45 minutes with me, and he tried to convince me in any so ways, but he just couldn't, and he was frustrated, and so he left. So here we have a very strong sign, because Monsignor Arieta told me, Monsignor Arieta is the secretary of the Pontifical Council of Legislative Texts. That means he's the expert that really does everything, not the cardinal that's appointed over him. And he was in that position. Pope Benedict appointed him that in February. And he told me in February there was no meeting of canonists to discuss the canonical value. And if Pope Benedict said to anyone that what he said meant that he resigned the papacy, that's not a juridical act and it's not an interpretation. For that act to be interpreted, Pope Benedict would have to write a document saying, the official interpretation of my act is that I renounce the munus. Okay? But Benedict can't write that interpretation, because if he writes it, it would only have value if he is still the Pope and has the authority to interpret it. Okay? And if he's still the Pope, he can't say the act made unpoped him, because he's, by the mere fact he's saying officially that the act unpoped him, he's affirming that he has not been unpoped. It would be contradictory. And if he's no longer the Pope, he can't interpret it. Okay? So Monsignor Arieta made a very important point that led me to an investigation on the question of the interpretation of law. And in interpretation of law, only the legislator can interpret his words, and his words must be understood in this simple sense. If you see the word ministerium and you claim it means any other word, you're interpreting the text. And in canon law, only the Pope can interpret his own texts. Okay? And in an act of renunciation, no one can interpret it, because if it needs interpretation, it's not clear. And if it's not clear, it's not valid. It's not. And Monsignor Arieta said to me, if it's not clear, it's not valid. Okay, but and he also admitted if it needs interpretation, it's not clear. But he won't say Benedict's renunciation is not clear. So Monsignor Arieta is either afraid of losing his position, or he's deeply conflicted and knows it's invalid and won't admit it to me because he's just absolutely terrorized by what maybe Bugnolo, the St. Mafia will do to him. But he is at least de facto a member of the conspiracy, because if he got up and said what I have said in this documentary, the whole edifice of lies would come down because of his authority as the Secretary of Pontifical Council of Texts. Although it might be the end of his ecclesiastic career, because if he fears that no one ever would come to his side, he never get praised to it. So if he fears it that much, it must mean, as I'm doing as an anthropologist, who is the only possible group that through the rest of Monsignor Arieta's life he would fear. And there's only one group that would be, because Bugnolo is going to die, the members of the Mafia St. Gallen are old, they're going to die. A lot of the cardinals that were there in 2013, they're old and they're going to die. Monsignor Arieta is still quite young. It must be the College of Cardinals, because they're the only institution that's going to be appointing, electing the next popes, and therefore putting in power someone who is either going to reward or punish Arieta. And if Arieta is afraid that much that for the rest of his life then he was not going to say the truth. So it must be that the conspiracy is in the College of Cardinals, okay? The ones that control the power in the College of Cardinals, it must be, or he wouldn't be afraid, or he would say the truth. Because I'm assuming he's an honest man, and he's only lying to me out of fear, okay? Not out of because he's part of the conspiracy, just because he's terrified, okay? And that's a possibility. So we've outlined the existence of the conspiracy and the nature of it. So there are a lot of anomalies now which show that there's something more to what was going on. So we know now from published reports that in the conclave of 2005, there was a battle between Montini's group and the group that elected Pope Benedict. And Bergoglio put himself forward in that conclave as a reformer, someone who'll clean up the curia, put everything in order, and but also have this new agenda on religion. And it was reported last summer by a priest in Argentina that in the summer of 2005, Benedict, to determine whether Benedict offered Bergoglio to be Secretary of State under him. And I believe Benedict did this because he was trying to find out, is Bergoglio really interested in reform, or does he want to change the religion? Because if he was only interested in the reform, he'd accept being Secretary of State, because Secretary of State can only do reform, he can't change religion. And Bergoglio rejected it. He didn't want to be under Benedict. And that showed Benedict that the opposition was not only pretending to be for reform, but was actually anti-Catholic, out to destroy the church. And now we see through the whole pontificate of Benedict, he's talking against idolatry, he's talking about against relativism, he's talking about against communion to adulterers, he's talking about all the points that Bergoglio will start preaching and pushing. So Benedict's whole pontificate, if you studied it, he's preaching against all the errors that come after. So Benedict knew who the opposition was and knew who his enemies were, okay? From 2011 onward, there's constant pressure and attacks. There's groups of priests in Germany, then in Austria, claiming if you don't allow married priests, gay marriages, women priests, we're going to go into schism. Hundreds of priests were signing these petitions. And it was interesting to see what Benedict did. He basically said nothing, and then he rapped on the wrist to the responsible people just with minor little penalties. He said, one, you're no longer Monsignor, that's it, which was a very light sentence. So he was trying to avoid schism that was being threatened and pushed, and he was doing it in the gentlest pointing way. He was trying to diffuse the situation as a very wise man who understood he didn't have that much political support in the College of Cardinals and among the bishops. And there's a famous video where Benedict goes to Germany, and there he is with the Chancellor of Germany walking down a line of greeting bishops, and the bishops all shake the hand of the Chancellor, but not of him. Half of them don't shake his hand. In front of everyone, it was the most disgraceful display of disrespect for the Roman Pontiff in Western Europe in 1,000 years among bishops. It was the most disgraceful thing. And so we see how strong it is, and we see where the problem. It wasn't the priests in the United States, Brazil, South Africa, or Hong Kong claiming to go into schism. It was the priests in Germany and Austria. So we can see already that the problem is in Germany and Austria, and we know that the group that put Bergoglio in power calls themselves the St. Golan Mafia. So the St. Golan Mafia, I could do a whole episode on that. They're the ones that came into power after Benedict got out. So according to the ancient proverb, who does it profit? If it profits them because they come into power, then they probably had something to do with it. And that means that Benedict is somehow maneuvering around that. And I wrote some articles on this, how Benedict has defeated Francis. And if you go to FromRome.Info and look how Benedict has defeated Francis, I explain the whole thing. That's my conjecture of the conspiracy. But I showed to you that there is a conspiracy, and these are the facts of it. And I don't think we can deny that now. And we have to admit this is what's going on. And the solution is doing what Archbishop Lenga and Bishop Gracida have done. They've come out publicly and said that Bergoglio has never been the Pope, Benedict is still the Pope. And now I have, from a very reliable source in Italy, heard that there are several bishops in Italy and now sustains the same position that Bugnolo is not the Pope. And I'm honored to know about a half dozen or more priests throughout the world who say Benedict in the canon of the Mass. Share these videos I've made with everyone, especially priests, and get them to start naming Benedict in the canon of the Mass and recognizing Benedict as the Pope. Because when the whole Church turns back in loyalty to Benedict, we can shake off all the errors of Bugnolo, all his evil control, and resist it. Because the Pope doesn't really have that much power. If we resist the fake anti-Pope Bugnolo, his whole power base will completely crumble and he'll have to flee the Vatican because he won't be getting any money, any support, and the governments will start declaring for Benedict. And that's what we need to do. That is the solution. And that is our divine obligation before God. And if we do it, we will merit eternal life, because this is a greatest need of the Church right now. It's greater than any other needs. It's the greatest crisis in the history of the Church. And therefore, it is our solemn duty of each and every baptized Catholic to work for the cause of Pope Benedict. This has been the seventh episode of the documentary on Pope Benedict's Renunciation, the facts, the laws, and the consequences. And I've just discussed what the consequences are and how we need to react. God bless you, and may Benedict be soon restored to the apostolic throne. God bless. Ave Maria.